Rediscover God's Word, verse by verse, chapter by chapter. This is Real Bible Study with teacher Tom Bradford. Welcome to Torah Class.
Well, the book of Obadiah offers three different perspectives on its main subject, which is what God intends to do to Edom, the nation of Jordan, being modern-day Edom. And I think to make this prophecy more relevant for modern folks, it would almost be better to cross out the word Edom and substitute the word nations. But we probably shouldn't, because we lose too much meaning in critical history background. We did that. Nonetheless, without doubt, Edom is being spoken of, both as an individual nation and as a representative type of the Gentile nations of the world, just as the New Testament tends to use Babylon in that same way. Now, the first perspective that is offered was contained in our study of verses 1 through 10 that deals with Edom as a separate and a distinct nation founded by Jacob, founded by Jacob, Israel's twin brother, Esau. It speaks of both the Edom of the past and the Edom, Jordan, of the future from the viewpoint of the time of Obadiah. That perspective is that God is going to use the nations of the world to attack and destroy Edom, effectively removing it as a sovereign nation. Now, the second perspective comes from verses 12 through 15, which not only deals with Edom as an individual nation, but also in the context of the other nations of the world. And it implies that what all of these nations have been doing against Israel and what they should not do in the future will bring down upon them the wrath of God. Yet there is the faintest hope that if they were to reverse course, stop doing it, perhaps some or all could avoid complete extermination. Now, the third perspective is what we have just beginning in verse 16, that takes on a more explicit nature of its own beginning at verse 18, which says that Edom, and probably the nations of the world, or at least the nations immediately surrounding Israel, will suffer annihilation by the hand of Israel, who is really but an agent of Jehovah, God of Israel. Now, many able Bible commentators and theologians attempt to harmonize these three perspectives into a single unified one, because they fear conflict with one another. Some theorize that perhaps each of these perspectives was written by a different author, even though they are in the minority, and I think their arguments just fall to the floor, because Obadiah has such inner consistency and conformity. Now, I liken these three perspectives to what I call walking around the rock. Okay, that is, if one were to happen across a large room-sized boulder, and then begin to walk around its circumference to examine it, and then explaining what it looks like, there will be a difference in appearance of color, texture, and features depending on where you're standing at the moment. And yet the boulder is still just one monolithic piece of rock, not multiple pieces that have been fused together. And to lose sight of that reality would be to lose sight of truth. Now, to somewhat summarize what we've studied so far, the divine wrath that is going to be visited upon Edom and ultimately on the nations of the world that Edom typifies. It's an event that is termed the day of Jehovah, or the day of the Lord. And further, because this day of the Lord is mentioned in a number of prophecies, including those of Ezekiel and Jeremiah, among others, we readily see that it is a day that is future to Obadiah, and it is still future to us. Although for Obadiah, the future could be counted in centuries, in our day, I suspect it can be counted in years, and not very many. Now, the other understanding that we must never lose sight of is that, except in the rarest of occasions, God uses humans to bring about his wrath. In the case of Edom, these humans he is going to use ultimately will be the Israelis. Now let's pick up by first rereading verses 16 through 21. So open your Bibles to Obadiah. We're going to read verses 16 through 21. 16 through 21. For just as you have drunk on my holy mountain, so will all the nations drink in turn. Yes, they will drink and gulp it down and be as if they had never existed. But on Mount Zion, there will be a holy remnant who will escape, and the house of Jacob will repossess their rightful inheritance. The house of Jacob will be a fire, the house of Joseph a flame, setting aflame and consuming the stubble, which is the house of Esau. None of the house of Esau will remain, for Adonai has spoken. Those in the Negev repossess the mountain of Esau. Those in the Shephelah, the land of the Philistines, they will possess the field of Ephraim and the field of Shomron, and Benjamin will occupy Gilead. Those from this army of the people of Israel, exiled among the Canaanites as far away as Zarphath, and the exiles from Jerusalem and Sepharad will repossess the cities in the Negev. Then the victorious will ascend Mount Zion to rule over Mount Esau, but the kingship will belong to Adonai. The first three of these verses are spoken to Judah. To Judah. The first verse has always fascinated Bible scholars because of the terms drunk and drink. And before we address that in more detail, it is better that we again visit the book of Jeremiah that also deals with Edom. And it gives us yet another perspective as we walk around the rock. Open your Bibles to Jeremiah chapter 49. Jeremiah chapter 49. And we're going to take a look at verses 7 through 22. Jeremiah chapter 49. Concerning Edom, this is what Adonai Sepha'ot says. Is there no wisdom left in Teman? Have her wise men forgotten how to counsel? Has their wisdom vanished? Flee, turn back, hide yourselves well, you who live in Dedan, for I am bringing calamity on Esau. When the time for me to punish him comes, if grape pickers came to you, they would leave no grapes for gleaning. If thieves came at night, they would destroy until they were satisfied. So I, for my part, have stripped Esau bare. I have exposed his hiding places. He will not be able to hide himself. He's doomed. Sons, brothers, neighbors, so that he's no more. Leave your orphans. I'll keep them alive. Let your widows trust in me. For this is what Adonai says. Those who do not deserve to drink from this cup will have to drink it anyway. So should you go unpunished? No, you will not go unpunished, and you certainly will drink it. For I have sworn by myself, says Adonai, that Bozrah will become a ruin and an object of astonishment, reproach, and cursing. All its cities will be ruins forever. I have heard a message from Adonai. A messenger is sent among the nations, saying, gather together, march against her, prepare for battle. Here, I will make you least among nations, the most despised people. Your capacity to terrorize has deceived you and made you arrogant. You make your home in rocky crags, seize the top of the mountain. But even if you build your nest high as an eagle's, from there I'll drag you down, says Adonai. Edom will become an object of horror. Everyone passing by will whistle in astonishment at all of its disasters. It'll be like the overthrow of Sodom, Gomorrah, and all their neighboring towns, says Adonai. No one will settle there anymore. No human being will live there again. It'll be like a lion coming up from the thickets of the Jordan against a strong settlement. In an instant, I will chase him away and appoint over it whomever I choose. For who's like me? Who can call me to account? What shepherd can stand up to me? So hear the plan of Adonai that he has devised against Edom, and his purpose that he will accomplish against those who live in Teman. The least of the flock will drag them away. Their own pasture will be in shock at them. The earth quakes at the sound of their fall. Their cry can be heard at the Sea of Suf. Like a vulture he will soar, swoop down, spread his wings against Bozrah. And on that day, the hearts of Edom's warriors will be like the heart of a woman in labor. Now, what I want you to notice particularly are the words of verse 12. It says, for this is what Adonai says, those who do not deserve to drink from this cup will have to drink it anyway. So should you go unpunished? No, you will not go unpunished. You will certainly drink it. Added to the words drunk and drink from Obadiah verse 16 are the words from this cup of Jeremiah 49:12. Now let's examine exactly what this is supposed to indicate to us. And I remind you of perhaps the principal underlying premise of the Hebrew roots approach to teaching the Bible that directly applies here. What those words and verses ought to mean to us are exactly what they meant to the people that wrote them and heard them all those centuries ago. The issue then is, what exactly did those thoughts mean to the people of the ancient past who lived in such a wildly different culture than those of us, especially in the developed West, who live in modern times? And once again, I want to give much credit to Paul Robbie for the stellar research that he did on the subject matter, as well as a few others who have contributed so significantly to my understanding of this important phrase. Okay, when we put together these several terms to form the phrase, drinking the cup of wrath, drinking the cup of wrath, something I've heard Christian pastors speak of so many times, we of course realize that what it is a very powerful metaphor. What's a metaphor? Now, we were all taught this in high school or even earlier, but I can tell you what we learned was overly simplistic. Okay, first, metaphor is not mere word substitution. Okay, I.A. Richards, in his insightful book, The Philosophy of Rhetoric, says this: when we use a metaphor, we have two thoughts of different things active together and supported by a single word or phrase whose meaning is a result of their interaction. I know that might seem a little like word salad, Right? But the essence of what he is saying can be captured in one of the most iconic metaphors in Western culture. Don't let the cat out of the bag. Now, we all know that this means not to accidentally or on purpose make something known that someone doesn't want to be known. So we have two different things in this metaphor that are active. First, a cat in a bag. Second, our intent of getting it across to someone to be careful not to reveal a secret or an intended surprise. And yet these two different actions are brought together in order to communicate the same thing. Now, I want to use this particular example because it explains the matter of metaphor on two levels. Okay, first, when this cat in a bag metaphor was historically first expressed and came into use, it was about something entirely different than what we think of it today. Totally different. And if we are honest, when we think about it, what about a cat in a bag image? It makes no sense at all. Today, what are the cartoons and images we have in our minds when that phrase is spoken? It's of a feline, a kitty cat, that for some reason finds itself inside of a cloth bag, and for some other reason, we have to be careful not to let it out. Why? Why is that cat in a bag in the first place? What's so bad about it escaping? How does that thought equate to not revealing a secret or something said in confidence? Answer, it doesn't. Makes no sense. It doesn't have the slightest connection, nor does it seem to have any inherent meaning. This is because when that metaphor was first coined, it had nothing to do with a kitty cat. It had to do with a whip. The infamous cat of nine tails. It was used to discipline sailors in the Royal Navy. By tradition, it was kept in a red bag. So to let the cat out of the bag meant that the cat of nine tails would be taken out from storage, removed from its storage bag, and then used to whip a sailor as punishment. At least that thought makes sense. But how is that relative to revealing a secret? Well, in the minds of those who used this metaphor, the reason that a sailor was being whipped was that a fellow sailor revealed something. He tattled on him. That got the recipient of the whipping into trouble. So to not let the cat out of the bag meant for one sailor to not reveal anything about a fellow sailor that might get him into trouble, thus getting whipped. Now, we see now how this metaphor makes so much more sense in relation to the message it intends to deliver. The message is, keep quiet, keep the secret, because there's going to be a very painful consequence. Now, another important principle about the use of metaphor, and that can be equally applied, by the way, to the device of simile, is that as it especially concerns the Bible, as hard as it can perhaps be to swallow, sometimes taking the meaning of a biblical phrase as metaphor is far superior to taking it literally. And the easiest way to know when a biblical phrase is meant as metaphor or simile, or more broadly, simply as a cultural expression, is when it makes little sense to us, when it is taken literally. Or even more, when taken literally, that phrase is obviously false on its face, or even utterly incoherent. Now, I'm going to give you an example from the New Testament. In the book of James, we read the following, and I'm going to use the NAS version simply because it's the most commonly way it's heard. James 2:10. For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in one point, he has become guilty of all. Think about that for a second, what it just said. In other words, if we take it literally, it means that if I break only one commandment, that's the same as if I'm breaking all the other ones. The implication being there's no point to even trying to obey the law of Moses because it's futile. And this has been spun in a number of ways, but mostly to say this is why the law of Moses was abolished by Christ. Never mind that such a meaning isn't even within the context of what's being said. From a more fundamental level, I want us to all stop and just think about that statement. Are we to seriously think that if we were to break but one of God's commandments, no matter what it is, that he sees us and judges us as if we broke all 613 of them? Or on another level, are we to take this to mean that breaking one of his laws, in essence, does away with all other of God's laws and commands? Well, frankly, either notion is absurd. If we drive 45 miles an hour on a 35-mile-an-hour zone in a cot and find, does this mean that in that one discretion, we have broken all the hundreds of traffic laws on the books and we're going to be judged guilty of violating them all? Or that this one violation results in all traffic laws on the books being abolished so that now there's none? Of course not. It's not logical, it's not rational, so it cannot be literally true because nothing else in the Bible, Old or New Testaments, makes any such illogical suggestion. Rather, taking this to mean that the law of Moses is abolished if we break one law is but a misguided attempt to understand something literally that was actually meant to be taken metaphorically or perhaps as a cultural expression. Taking it literally and then spinning it to try to make sense of it when no literal sense works also helps to fulfill a common agenda of the Gentiles only Constantinian church. Rather, what this metaphor or expression meant to the writer of the book of James is, we must not take God's laws and commands as relative. And so somehow believe that my sins are small, but yours are bigger, and so I deserve a better judgment from God than you do. Or that is expressed in these verses, by the way, from James, that although I murdered someone, well, at least I didn't commit adultery. So I have some rationale for being a better person before God as a murderer than as an adulterer. Bottom line, clearly, these words, if taken literally, make no sense in practice. So it is actually an expression. Now, the point I'm making is that the phrase drinking from the cup of wrath was also based on a commonly understood metaphorical meaning in the biblical era that's far removed from us. And so we need to rediscover from this metaphorical comparison what it intended to bring to mind to the speaker, to the hearer, especially since in modern times we know that it applies to the events of the end times. So what I'm asking you to do, so far as you're able, is to just erase what you've always envisioned about that phrase and begin anew. The words drinking and cup are meant to invoke the image of wine drinking and all that it entails and all that it embodies, both good and bad. So the idea is that drinking the cup of Jehovah's wrath is meant to make the subject of how one experiences divine wrath better understood by using the instrument of drinking from a cup of wine as a symbolic expression, or rather a symbolic representation. Now, I'm going to say this in a different way. Drinking wine from a cup and drinking the cup of Jehovah's wrath have similarities in their outcomes and in what the drinker experiences. But how? In what ways are they similar? Let's disassemble this phrase, looking at each word before we put it back together again. The English word cup is in Hebrew kos. And it's just what you think it is. It's a vessel for holding wine and then drinking from it. One of the common uses for the term cup in the Bible is to metaphorically use it to describe a person's fate or a person's destiny or someone's allotted portion of something. This can be given in the form of a curse, could be a blessing, or it can bring abundance, or it can bring disaster. Psalm 116 gives us a very good example of this. In Psalm 116, verses 12 through 14, how can I repay Adonai for all his generous dealings with me? I will raise the cup of salvation and call on the name of Adonai. I'll pay my vows to Adonai in the presence of all his people. In this psalm, in verse 13, the psalmist wants to glorify God for the gift of salvation. Salvation is the portion. It's, maybe you could say it's the destiny. Yet Jehovah has allotted to him. And it comes from the cup that is the vessel that figuratively holds that salvation. So now the second word to look at is wine. In Hebrew, the most often used word for wine is yain. A few times it's tirosh. Now, there's a few other terms used to denote wine, strong drink, and so on. We don't need to get into that for the moment. What's interesting is that we find in several places in the Bible the topic of mixing wine. Mixing wine. Mixing wine means to add spices to it, to change the flavor a little bit. And if you are in or you come from the more traditional Christian church environment, it's not unusual for it to be taught that the wine that Jesus used, or that was the result of his miracle at a wedding in Cana in which he turned water into wine, was actually non-alcoholic grape juice. That's simply false. Wine was part of every Jew's diet, rich or poor. The only difference was probably in quantity and certainly in quality. And as in both the Old and the New Testaments, it was used by the temple priests as well as by the average Jew during festive occasions. Now, wine is actually portrayed as a good and positive thing. It's good. The only reason that since the late in the 19th century that wine and all liquor got a bad name was because of its growing misuse and the rise of the Women's Temperance League that eventually resulted in the Prohibition era in the USA. Now, for you younger folks, Prohibition speaks to a few years from 1920 to 1933 when all alcoholic beverages were outlawed. But biblically, wine use was not just fine, it was ordained. And young children drank wine diluted with water. It was meant to bring joy to dull pain and was simply a very pleasant tasting beverages. But the scriptures also speak to the downside of wine drinking, such as drunkenness. And this is critical for us to grasp because it is the drunkenness aspect that is at the center of understanding what drinking from the cup of Jehovah's wrath is meaning. It's what it's all about. Now let's talk about the word drink or drinking. Generally speaking, unless the subject clearly is the drinking of water, the term drink or drinking is speaking of consuming wine or of some other even stronger alcoholic beverage. When the term is used by itself, without including what it is that the person is drinking, it is most often associated with one of the following three things I'm going to tell you about. First, it has to do with slaughter. This could be as when Israel defeats an enemy and is said to drink of the blood of the slain. The same could be said when a predatory animal like a lion kills and devours its prey. Second, it is figurative speech for wicked behavior. Sometimes in the Bible we'll read of a wicked person drinking, meaning they're enjoying the fruits of their wickedness. The book of Job gives an example of this in Job 15, verses 15 and 16. God doesn't trust even his holy ones. No, even the heavens are not innocent in his view. How much less one loathsome and corrupt a human being who drinks iniquity like water. There's a couple of places where we read of drinking sin like water. Or how the violence done by the wicked is their meat and their drink. And third, it has to do with human pain. In Proverbs 26:6, telling a message to a fool and sending him out is like cutting off one's feet and drinking violence. The idea in Job is when someone sends a fool as a messenger, they are likely to receive an end result that is suffering and bitterness. The greater point is suffering is brought about by Jehovah. Now we'll move to the word drunkenness. Drinking wine is a pleasant and positive experience of receiving blessing. But drunkenness is condemned in the harshest terms. We all know, and the Bible warns, that as good as drinking wine can be, some can't stop, and they overdo it. The more one drinks, the more uninhibited one becomes, and the more prone to do things that are clearly irrational and destructive. Once this stage is reached, the person doing the drinking is labeled as a drunkard. Proverbs 23, verses 31 to 35. Don't gaze at the red wine as it gives its color to the cup. It may glide down smoothly now, but in the end, it bites like a serpent. Yes, it strikes like a poisonous snake. Your eyes will see peculiar things. Your mind will utter nonsense. You'll feel as if lying on the waves of the sea, sprawled on top of the mast. They hit me, but I don't even feel it. They beat me up. I didn't even know it. When will I wake up? I'll go get another drink. The results of drinking too much can be stupor. This generates confusion, staggering around, making bad decisions, excessive sleep. Judgment is abandoned. And yet drinking wine is recommended for those who are dying or terribly distressed because it induces forgetfulness and numbness to one's condition. But for an otherwise normal person, drinking too much wine can literally make a person go crazy. And while drinking wine can be good to relieve pain, on the other hand, it can be detrimental because pain is our body's way of warning us that something bad or dangerous is happening to us. Proverbs 26:9, Like a thorn which falls into the hand of a drunkard, so is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. So here in Proverbs, the idea is that a person who is drunk on wine and is stuck with a thorn doesn't notice the sensation of pain. Doesn't know that they've even been injured, which is comparable to a fool who tries to misuse a proverb to explain his or her action, but is simply unaware that they are saying something foolish or doing something that can result in harm to themselves or others. Being drunk can make one helpless. They can get so drunk they don't recognize danger, can become an easy target for criminals, or can be easily overrun by an enemy. One famous Bible story that will highlight this happens in 1 Kings, when Zimri, the servant of Israel's king Elah, attacks and murders the king who'd been drinking himself drunk, and so he made himself helpless. And drinking to excess can make a person become disgraced, usually by doing something grossly inappropriate, if not perverted, such that his reputation is ruined. I mean, does a day go by that in one media source or another, we don't read of a celebrity who blames an immoral act on being drunk or on being high, as though somehow it is not they that have committed the act, but rather some alcohol or drug? Or someone who drinks and drives and kills someone, and once they have slept it off, they don't even remember the incident. So they ask a judge or jury to show mercy, since they didn't mean to do harm, and so they shouldn't be held accountable. So in all of these explanations and examples, we can see exactly how we are meant to understand the nature of cup, drinking, wine, drunkenness. These are to be compared to the experience of a wicked person or nation. This is what they suffer when they are under God's wrath. It's the terrible effects of what it's like to suffer God's wrath that are embodied in the similar offense of drinking too much wine. And without doubt, we shouldn't be so literal and narrow as to believe this only applies to drinking wine. In modern application, any strong drink, any illicit drug that causes one to get drunk or high can be substituted, and pay attention to this. The effects of being in a drunken or a high stupor are never isolated. Every aspect of our humanity can be affected. Our emotions, our behavior, our minds, what we do to our friends, to our family, often people we don't even know. In the end, we find that in the Holy Scriptures, the cup of wrath comes exclusively from Jehovah, and he personally directs the process of exactly what happens to individuals and nations that fall under that wrath. And the wrath is always aimed at the deserving. Yet on earth there is inevitably collateral damage because of the nature of humanity. It seems, though, that in the end times, there will be a one-time exception for the righteous who will not suffer the effects of God's wrath. This goes by the name the rapture. But exactly what that experience is going to be is very hard to tell from what little information is given about it. Now, what's interesting, and it is something that I taught some time ago, is that the prophetic word itself is what sets God's wrath into motion on earth. That is, these prophetic words we have read are far more than just a warning of doom. They're like pressing the enter key on a computer keyboard. The giving of the prophecy is also the way of fulfillment is executed. Once God speaks it to a prophet in heaven, it's a done deal. On earth, it's also a done deal. Just hasn't happened yet. Because its time hasn't come. Folks, understand. All of these prophecies about Edom, about Jordan, and all the nations on earth being annihilated in the end times has already been set into motion. It's not stoppable. Nothing can delay it. The end is determined. It's like a hurricane that was predicted, but now is moments from making landfall on the coastal town in which you live. If you wait too long to prepare for it, then it is comparable to being a drunkard who cannot see danger because of the stupor they're in. So all that's left for them to experience is the moment of their calamity or the destruction. Therefore, once again, I plead with you, prepare for what the prophets say is coming. Because the mere fact that the prophets have spoken means the match has been struck. The fuse has been lit. We're just not exactly sure of how long or short that detonator cord is. But the explosion is assured. Now, as concerns the end times, God's wrath is going to fall on the nations through the agency of Israel, or in defense of Israel, or perhaps both. Either way, Israel has experienced God's wrath in times past, but this time they won't. Rather, it's the nations that will. What's the cause of God's wrath against the nations? Their hostility or even ambivalence towards Israel. The end times will put an end to the nations of the world as we know them today, and it will be permanent. In a strange twist that bothers Christian theologians and denominational leaders to the point that most refuse to face it, hear this: there is no call to repentance in these prophecies, nor is there any amount of repentance that will forestall the prophesied wrath. And we've run into this notion before concerning Israel, and especially as concerns the former northern kingdom of Israel. That is, in both Hosea and Amos, we learn that the northern kingdom had crossed over some cosmic line in the sand in which there was no return. No amount of repentance was going to save the kingdom from God's earthly agent of wrath, Assyria. No amount. Essentially, then, the purpose of the prophecy as a pronouncement of doom was to tell Ephraim and Israel why they were going to be destroyed, and it gave the relative few who listened and heeded Jehovah the opportunity to prepare. The preparation, history shows, was mainly in the form of trusting God by voluntarily packing up and moving, either to Judah or some nearby nation to avoid the attack and forced exile by Assyria. All right, let's get back to verse 16 of Obadiah. Verse 16 opens with the Hebrew word ki, K-I, ki, which translates to English is for, F-O-R, for. And it is used to connect this to verse 15. That is, ki means that verse 16 happens because of what verse 15 says. And verse 15 says that because of what Edom did to Israel, the same is going to happen to Edom. Now, who is the you who have drunk on God's holy mountain? Who's the you? This is why I mentioned at the outset of today's lesson that verses 16 through 18 are about God addressing Judah. Therefore, this is saying that it is Judah that has drunk on God's holy mountain. Recalling what we just learned about the terms drunk and drinking, then we understand that this is speaking about the negative effects of being drunken, meaning that in times past, Israel drank from God's cup of wrath. Israel did. Therefore, now the nations will drink from this same cup of wrath, thus having the same experience that Israel had had. If we reword this verse just a bit to get across its meaning, it would say something like, just as you people of Judah have drunk my cup of wrath, so in the end times will all the nations drink from that same cup as well. That's what it's meaning. God's holy mountain. God's holy mountain. It always refers to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. Always. The name of the mountain is actually Mount Moriah. That said, we should not think that in this use it's referring only to Jerusalem. It's just that Jerusalem was the capital of Judah, and thus representative of all Judah. Everywhere in Judah had suffered essentially the same. Verse 16 goes on to say that the nations will drink continuously. In fact, the nations will gulp it down. Of course, this continuing metaphor of drinking and gulping is using wine drinking as its symbol. Although there are some deeper grammatical nuances, in the end, what this is explaining is that the nations will drink from this cup continuously and zestfully. They won't sip. They'll slurp it down. Meaning they'll think what they're doing is a good and a pleasurable thing for them. But like a drunk who drinks more and more and faster, enjoying every gulp, the nations have lost their grip on sober reality. And that is what is leading them to destruction. The first sentence of verse 16 ends with, and they will be as if they had never been. What this is telling is that the destructions of the world's nations will be so complete that it will be like before they ever existed. We have an expression that we use today, bombing an enemy back into the Stone Age, which brings across the same kind of idea. The nations will lose any significance, have no means to operate as a nation any longer. This same thought is expressed in other places in the Bible. It's not just here. Isaiah 17:14. As evening falls, you can see terror before sunrise. They have ceased to be. This is the lot for those who plunder us, the fate of those who prey on us. Jeremiah 46:28. Don't be afraid, Jacob, my servant, said Adonai, for I'm with you. I will finish off all the nations where I've scattered you. However, you I will not finish off. I will discipline you as you deserve, but not completely destroy you. My friends, we are the nations. There's no getting around it. We are the nations. There is no sign of there being exceptions. I realize this is anything but a happy, optimistic thought, but better truth than false hope. I think we'll stop here for today.
For more teachings of real Bible study and to rediscover God's Word with Tom Bradford, visit Torah Class today on the web, streaming TV, or download the Torah Class mobile app.